coffee? I said, come on, let's go. Let's go. I'll go to the secret passage.
What's up, man?
Yeah, I told him, I said,
you good?
yeah, we go on in. They said, come on, let's go. I said, yeah.
Have a seat.
I asked him, I said, y'all left some bricks and spell. Yeah. On your 50th anniversary celebration, I want to read from a pastor of what he said about his preaching to the congregation when he arrived there. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, beginning at verse 18. And I want to tag this text tonight, a word about the cross. First Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18 reads, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it's the power of God. I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolishness the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. Jews demanded signs and Greeks looked for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles, but to those whom God has called, both Jew and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and his wisdom of God, for the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength." This is the word of God. You may be seated. A word about the cross. Inside of the Manchester Museum in England hangs Holman Hunt's masterpiece, The Shadow of Death. It's his depiction as a pre-Raphaelite artist who lived 3 years in Jerusalem and painted scenes from the life of Jesus. This one is of Jesus in a carpenter's shop where he is stripped down to his waist, and the sunlight breaking through the door of the shop catches his image as he stretches his arms upward and outward and casts a shadow against the wall. On the shelves, you find the equipment that would be used to nail and hammer a person to a stick, and in front of him, the trestle where the saw has been laid was the image that Holman Hunt painted, and it has lasted, and it is a masterpiece. And people come to that museum to behold what this artist predicted would happen to Jesus Christ on a hill called Calvary. Was it a true picture? No, it was his imagination. But actually and historically, you and I know that's exactly what happened to Jesus. He was nailed to a cross, the cross. When you go up Fleet Street in London and you come to St. Paul's Cathedral, you enter through the doors and you stand beneath that magnificent dome, and you look in both directions, you know that you're standing at the center of a building that has been shaped like a cross. And up and down the hallways are alcoves, and there are chapels. And over each arch is a cross. You go down into the basement where the crypts are kept, where Duke Wellington is there, and Lord Nelson, and Christopher Wren himself, the architectural genius behind the St. Paul's Cathedral. And you see on each of their coffins a cross. You come up the steps on the main floor. You might see a docent wearing a gold cross in the lapel of his suit jacket, or a woman who is wearing a cross hanging as a pendant from her thinly gold necklace. A cross. You might even hear somebody break out and sing, "Alas, then did my Savior bleed, and did my sovereign die." And if you knew nothing about Christianity, if no one had ever told you anything about the symbolisms of Christianity, you would probably walk out and say these words: those people in there, they are up to something about believing in the cross. There's something magnificent about the cross. And that's what the Apostle Paul brings to our attention tonight as we celebrate 50 years of saying that what has held the faith together is the centrality of the cross. Paul comes to Corinth, and he's a pastor, this little tent maker from Tarshish, a gospel globe trotter, a church planner. And he has just left Athens, Greece. He has stood up on Mars Hill. He has been in the shadow of intelligentsia. He's looked at the Parthenon with all of the different gods, and the Areopagus and Areopagus, and he stands in the marketplace. And there, while he's there, he begins moving toward another city, walking around the coastline of the Mediterranean. The blue azure waters of the sea laps against the stone walls. He crosses over these different temples that display the images of rebirth and resuscitation and renewal, and he sees these different deities, these false idols. And when he arrives at Corinth, he shows up there and he makes one determination. He says, I know that I speak multiple languages, and I know that I've studied at the University of Tarshish, and I know I was next in line to, succeed Gamaliel. I know all of that, but I determined now to know nothing except for Jesus Christ and him crucified. What can we glean from verse 18 tonight about the cross? The power, the magnificence, the majesty, the magnetism of the cross. Paul just simply begins by saying, don't forget that the message of the cross is defined by the cross. In fact, the word of the cross defines the Christian message. In verse 18, that word simply says, and the message of the cross. The word for message in the NIV is the same word that we get the word for, logos, word, rational thought. He says that the message of the cross, the word about the cross, defines the Christian message. In fact, you don't have to say anything else. You just hold up the cross, and it begins to tell the story of a Jesus that was nailed up on a Friday in a humiliating manner, that he was executed as an insurrectionist, that Jesus was killed because his kingdom stood up against the empire of that day, that Jesus elevated those whose heads were bowed down, that Jesus came and gave life to those who were dead in spirit, that Jesus gave new sight to those who had no vision, that Jesus gave legs to people that could not walk. In fact, in short, they hung him up because he did good. Isn't that amazing? That Jesus was nailed to the cross because he did good. It reminded me of what one preacher, R.A. Coons, who was preaching at the Keswick Bible Conference in England. And Combs tells the story of a young Anglican boy that was gifted a Bible by his godparents at his baptism. When he went home, he read through the New Testament, and he was looking for pictures about God. And he started finding pictures. Jesus holding children in his lap, Jesus feeding multitudes of people who were hungry, Jesus who had given health to those who had been broken, Jesus who had gone about giving new life, inspiration to those whose lives have been depleted. You know, he had gone about doing good. And then he came to this picture where Jesus had been nailed to the cross. And this boy started crying because he asked one question: what did he do that he deserved to die like that? His mother heard him crying, came in the room, and you could imagine, raised a question about why is he crying. And he said, what did he do? Who would do anything like this to him? To him. And the mother took the Bible and she just threw it to the side and say, oh, that's just myth, it's figmentation. You don't have to really believe that. But I'm here tonight after 50 years of you gathering as a community of faith to say to us that the one glue that holds us together is not only the cross, but that the cross is historically, factually, actually real. It happened. It ain't a myth. It's not a figmentation. It really happened. It happened. It happened. And so tonight, this message of the cross reminds us of what Paul came preaching when he came to Corinth. He came with a verbal expression, a visual depiction, and a demonstration of Christ's crucifixion and later the vindication of God for him in resurrection. That's the only thing. If anything else is preached beyond that, there's really none effect. The old preacher would preach, and this is what they would tell us: don't you sit down without going to the cross. And I'm gonna tell you something, I've tried to close sermons and avoid going to that cross, but some kind of way, if you worth your salt in preaching, singing, ushering, serving, leading, guiding, you better get to the cross because there's power in the cross. Can I say one other thing about this? That's the message of the cross. The word of the cross defines the Christian message. But the word of the cross also divides the listening congregation. People that are here tonight are divided over that. There are some people, even in Concord, who says, I don't really want to hear about this cross. That happened 2,000 years ago. I'm not really interested in that. But I'm here to tell you that in the same way, if you stand beneath that dome in St. Paul, you discover that the shadow of the cross reaches for 21 centuries. From Jerusalem to Dallas, from Judea to Texas, you can't get from under the cross. And the congregation was divided. You see, remember when Paul comes to Corinth, he plants this church there. There's a division that's going on. There were some who said, well, we are of Cephas, and some said, well, I'm of Apollos, and some said, well, I'm of Paul, and then some said, well, I'm of Jesus. And Paul knew that disunity would never allow the church to grow and flourish the way that God intended it to. And so when he's determined to know nothing of the cross, it is the cross that pulls all that is disunified into one central place, that God pulls it all together. And in that coming together, the congregation is still divided. You see, the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to those who are being saved, it's the power of God. Listen to the language. The message of the cross is foolishness. It's the very word where we get moron from. That's right. It means to be silly, absurd, beside yourself. It could even be called obtuse or stupid for those that reject. But there are two ways that people respond to the cross. Some object to it outwardly and openly, and some reject the cross inwardly and privately. You look at this and say, foolishness. Some people say that is foolish. Havelock Ellis was a scientist of another generation. Havelock Ellis, he responded to the message of the cross by just simply saying this: Jesus was a lunatic. He was diagnosed that way the day that he had a conversation in the wilderness with Satan and said, and at that very moment, everything that Jesus said after the temptation story qualified him to be a lunatic. Who else but a lunatic would be nailed up on a cross and then to claim that something good could come out of it? Foolishness. Some object to it. But then there are others, on the other hand, who are like Thomas Carlyle, the essayist, who says, well, maybe not a lunatic, a good guy, but just not at himself. That's what he would say. In fact, you see, when we hear a sermon like this, the first thing we think about are the people that nailed Jesus to the cross. And we would say that those that nailed him were terrible people. But I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about those of us who are here tonight. That if we're not careful, we too have the tendency to nail Christ to the cross. That we could nail him anew to the cross. That's what Carlyle said. He says, in fact, what we would do is we would invite Jesus to dinner, sit down and have a conversation with him, hear him talk to us about his ethical truths and his morals. And then when he leaves, we would all get together and laugh at him and say, can you believe what that man is going around teaching? He's talking about the way up is the way down. The way to gain is to give it away. The way to wear a crown is to bear a cross. Can you believe that anybody can do that? And yet, if we're not careful, we'll walk out the door the same way, saying, I can buy some of what Jesus says, but I cannot follow him that far. And that's what the cross does. It divides us at that very moment. It reminds us that as followers of Jesus Christ, that our living lifestyles, morals, and ethics are different than anybody and anywhere else. We're a different group of people. We're a strange group of people. But then there's another side to this cross. On one hand, it says that the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. But listen, on the other side, it's the power of God to those who are being saved. Now, Paul's a grammarian. This man knows language, and you probably, as I concluded, said Paul could have picked a better synonym to make the sentence balance. Listen to it. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those who are being saved, it's the power of God. No, If foolishness is on one side, then the right word that ought to balance it off is the word wisdom. And so Paul should have wrote, but he didn't. Because he says, that's your version of the opposite of foolish. For those who object to the meaning and the message of the cross is foolishness, but the opposite side is not wisdom, but is power for living. You need a power that can help you face the difficulties that confront you in your life. I began in 1977 my journey as a religion scholar. And one of the people that I ran into was Immanuel Kant, who elevated secular morality to a high level in which he referred to it, and some of you remember it, categorical imperative. I just like the way that sounds. But the meaning behind categorical imperative is that Kant believed that if everyone universally adopted our particular behavior, then it would become true. Another way of saying that is, if everybody's doing it, it must be right. This was human wisdom. And this is the highest level of secular intelligence at this particular time. Now, the question I want to ask you is, do you know how Kant went to the grave? Boy, that's why I love preaching here. Y'all ask all the right questions. The way Kant went to the grave is that he had a proclivity for sticky, sweet cakes. And when he would eat them, it attacked him biologically, and he had negative physiological reactions. Stay with me now, I'm going somewhere. And so when he would eat sweet, sticky cakes, it made him sick literally to the point of death. And that's how he died, eating sweet, sticky cakes. You say, well, what they got to do with categorical imperative? Everything. Because if the imperative is the highest secular standard in which if everybody did what the other is doing by behavior, it becomes a universal law. Here's a man who came up with that beautiful category and at the same time was too weak to break his own habit. You see, tonight, most of us don't need to be smarter. Tonight, most of us don't need to read another book. Most of us don't need another conference. We don't need another lecture. We need a power that can help us to overcome that which cripples us. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to those who are being saved, it is the power of God. And if it's anything that we need tonight, we need a power to overcome the evil that we confront and what confronts us. One more time in verse 18 and I'm done. For the message of the cross, and then you see in this that the word of the cross defines the Christian message, divides the listening congregation, but it diagnoses the church of the Lord Jesus Christ. Look at the diagnostic that is taken: perishing and saved. Tonight, when you read this in the continual present tense, what that verse is saying tonight, and y'all look good. I mean, you men are handsome, you women are beautiful, but you're perishing. Tonight, free radicals and terrorists are beneath our skin, eating up at us, and every single day, a little bit more of you die. And the older you get, you don't need nobody to tell you the reality of that. You ain't tonight what you used to be 50 years ago. But that's all right, we're perishing. And so this cross, the message of it, is foolishness to these people who are perishing. But I'll tell you what, it's the power to those of us who are being saved. Several years ago, I was in the Holy Lands and I was sitting in the amphitheater, and to the side you can see Skull Mountain. They call it Gordon's Calvary. And when I was sitting there, I looked at that Calvary and my mind went back as far as I could get it back. And this is what I heard those saints of old, those black pilgrims singing, "Were you there when they crucified my Lord?" And I was sitting right there and I said, was I there? And then I said, yes, I was there. 2,000 years ago, before I was even born, I was on that cross that Christ was nailed to that cross, bearing my sin that I could not bear for myself, dying in my place, giving me new life, giving me a new hope, giving me a new future, giving me a new destination. I was there on that cross. And then I asked myself, Wes, do you really believe what's on that cross? Do you really believe that what's on that cross took place? I'm gonna ask you that question. Do you really believe it? You know, you ask people that and their heads sometimes say, well, maybe I believe, but do you believe it? And then I ask myself, if I don't believe that, where do I go? And then I said, maybe I'll go to hedonism and I'll drink from the cup of pleasure, only to discover at the bottom is bitterness. Then I said, well, maybe I need to go and I'll go and I'll start drinking from materialism. And then I said, but once you've bought everything that you can buy, after you have laid your head up on the pillow, you wake up and say, there's nothing but a stone beneath you. And then I said, well, maybe I'll go to humanism. And then you say, there's a matter of time that all the human wisdom in the world, it begins to fade. And you got to go somewhere where you are able to say this, my hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. And so then tonight, you start surfing around, you know, you can find preachers preaching on everything. And somebody's going to be preaching about the cross, and then you ask yourself, is there hope and healing, and is there help and health in the cross? And I believe in this cross. I believe in the one that died on the cross, because in it I find in the atonement the healing that I need. There is healing in the cross. Not just physical healing, but there is emotional healing. There is mental healing. And I need somebody that is able to blot out my transgression. I need somebody, you get the point, I need that. Can I give you one more thing and I'll be done? Beyond this whole diagnosis, you have to also then look and discover that the word about the cross that defines the Christian message also demolishes human wisdom. In verse 19, it just simply says this, that I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. There are times where you want to put human wisdom over God's ways. And we belong to a tradition where God has shown us that his ways may not be our ways. And our ways may not be his way, but his way is always the best way. I mean, you look at the biblical record, And you discover that there are always those that think that they know more than God. That they believe that they can answer God better than God can answer himself. Verse 19 comes from Isaiah 29. It's shaped around the story of Sennacherib. And this evil tyrant of Assyria is going to come up against Hezekiah the king. And the wise counsel of Hezekiah says to him, look, man, we need to shine up our brass, sharpen our spears, and go forward and go over to Egypt and ask them to be our emissaries. And at that moment, the prophet simply said this, don't you do that. Stand still and see the salvation of God. Now, come on now. Here you are coming up against an enemy and an adversary, and the best advice that you can get is to stand still and see God go to work. Where did Isaiah get that from? He must have read Exodus 14. When the children were caught up in a divine cul-de-sac. That E.K. Bailey called that a divine cul-de-sac. And they come to the mouth of the water and there's nowhere to go. They can't go forward, they can't go to the side, and they can't go behind them. And the only thing that they can do is stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. And so Isaiah reaches back on history and simply says this, hey, look here, Hezekiah, if God did it then, God can do it now. Somebody tonight, you're at a situation where you don't know which way to turn. You don't know whether to go forward, backwards, retreat, and yet all you got tonight is to stand still, because just because you don't see God working doesn't mean that God ain't working. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean that God is not involved in it. And sometimes the greatest gift that the cross can give to us is to learn how to wait on God. It might be Friday, but Sunday's coming. Oh, let me move on now. I'm done. You know how much I enjoy being here with you, but I'm going to wrap it up now. So then notice in verse 20, the questions that are asked. And it's just simply this. Where's the wise person? That's all he's asking. Where's the person of letters? Find me the smartest person you know and answer and ask them to answer how I operate. Because everybody at that moment looked at the cross as being what? Foolishness. And so Paul says, I bring you a message. Where are the wise? Where are the philosophers? Where are the teachers of the day? Ask them to answer and explain how God does what God is doing. And every age always has some smart somebody. Oh yeah. You remember when you had to read Friedrich Nietzsche? Yeah, all of you had to read him at some time or another. And the only reason why you remember Friedrich Nietzsche is because Nietzsche made one statement that went viral and popular. And it was just simply this: God is dead. That's the only reason why we mention Nietzsche. Because Nietzsche said, God is dead. God is dead. And I grew up, an old preacher said this: if God is dead, tell me, when did he die? If God is dead, tell me what cemetery they buried him in. God is dead, what was the diagnosis? Then the old preacher said, y'all got to tell me because I'm his child. That's the only reason why we remember him. We remember Swinburne's great line where he says, "O thou hast conquered, O Galilean, because the world has grown gray beneath thy breath." No, he ain't never wrote nothing else worth to remember. But he always makes a good preaching point when you quote him because of how foolish his wisdom was. And here in this very demolition of human wisdom, Paul is reminding the church, he says, God destroys the human wisdom, and it is out of the cross that he makes sense out of life. I'm done. That's all I wanted to tell you. So let me give you one last point, and I'm going to sit down. So, now, I could have wrapped this up by going to this verse, but I mean, look, you got all dressed up. I had to give you at least 20 minutes. So what is Paul getting to? Follow the line of logic. He says, well, the word of the cross defines the Christian message, divides the listening congregation. It diagnoses the human condition. It demolishes human wisdom, but more than that, and here it is, and I'm done, it displays the power of God. Have you noticed something happens when you come to church and start talking about the cross? Oh, I don't care how contemporary you are, how progressive you are, how fundamental you are. It's something about the cross that when you hear it, it gets a hold of you. At the cross, where I first saw the light. See what I'm talking about? Look at you. You right there. Was it for crimes that I have done? He groaned upon the tree, amazing pity, grace unknown, and love beyond degree. When you hear it, you say, oh, we in church now? Because the cross displays the power. Look at three names in the last verses: Jews, Greeks, and then he says, and those whom God called. So he says, the Jews are always looking for religious intervention. The Greeks are always looking for philosophical explanation. But those who are called are always waiting on God's demonstration. The Jews are always looking for religious intervention. And there's some of us here tonight, we predicate our faith on this. Well, if God bring my child back, if God give me a job, if God heal me of this sickness, if God give me a raise. Let me tell you something. God doesn't have to do none of that. He's already shown his greatest act of love on a hill called Calvary. And if God has to do all of that, chances are you still won't come to him. We come to him because of grace, and we come to him of faith. We come to him for who God is and what God has done. But wait now. Always looking for some kind of religious intervention. Bertrand Russell was interviewed by a newspaper and said, what would it take, Bertrand, for an atheist to believe in God? And this is what he said. He said, well, if there's a such thing as a God could tell me what's going to happen to me in the next 24 hours, even the improbable things, tell me what the weather's going to be like and all that. He said, then maybe I would believe that there's a divine intelligence. That person comes to church every Sunday morning, always looking for a divine intervention. Let me say it one more time. God has already intervened on a hill called Calvary. But then there's always this need for a philosophical explanation. I was listening to some chic sisters talking once. I shouldn't have been listening, but when they started talking about the Bible and church, I just started eavesdropping. Because that's my field, that's what I do. And so when I hear somebody say church or Jesus, and so one of them, and there had been, it was a salubrious kind of lunch they had been drinking. And so while they, in between drinking, one girl made an astonishing statement. She says, this is why I don't go to church. Because these people that go to church, they're always talking about, God can forgive. I don't think it's right that you could, you do all of this sinning, you do all this messing up, and then run to church on Sunday talking about, Lord, forgive me. And I didn't break into it. I said, so let me help those of you who think like that. I asked earlier, well, where are you going to go? What you going to do with your sin? What you going to do with your issue? What you going to do with your problem? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring it to the cross and leave it there. Have a good night. May God bless you real good. But on my way to my seat tonight, what I want you to know that I have a hope that's rooted and grounded in Jesus Christ. That I have a hope that is rooted in him, and that's why I put all of my confidence. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. Is there anybody here that's really ever tried my Jesus? Won't he make a way? Won't he bring you out? Won't he fix your heart? Won't he regulate your mind? Can I tell you what power would do? It'll put running in your feet, clapping in your hand, joy in your heart. And this joy that I have, the world didn't give it, and the world can't take it away. This joy, yeah, joy that I have, the world didn't give it, and the world can't take it away. This joy. We got a whole lot going on in the world. We got a lot going on in the White House. We got a whole lot going in the State House. We got a lot going on in the City House. But I'm here to tell you that my hope ain't there, that my hope is on a higher court, that my peace is in a higher law, that my love is in a higher love. Have a good night, Concord. Happy 50 years. But on my way home, aren't you glad that we have somebody? Let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Yeah.